What is up, everyone? Aeneas here. We're back for the top 5 new brews for MTG1 or Phyrexia All Will Be One. We're coming in with the number 2 deck, and this one is Gruul Oil Burn. Try to say that 5 times fast. Gruul Oil Burn. This deck is a little bit of a handed to us from Wizards, but not super straightforward. And the more I looked into it and thought about the synergies and the different ways you can play the deck, the more I really like the deck. So let me show you how it plays out and what's the idea behind the deck. And yeah, I think you'll like it too. So let's get into it. All right, so the main synergy of the deck is oil, if that wasn't clear from the name. And Gruul in particular has two really strong 1-drops that have oil synergies. So we have Evolving Adaptive and Exuberant Fuseling. So this one is a 0/0, but it comes in with 1 oil counter, and it gets +1/+1 for each oil counter. Then when you play a creature with larger power or toughness than it gets another oil counter. So and that's key thing to remember is toughness as well. Keep that in mind. That's important. All right, so it starts as a 1/1, and it's going to keep growing and getting more and more oil counters on it. And that will be important because there's a couple different ways you can win with the deck. First one is beating down the opponent. So we used to have a card called something Pack Leader. No, is it Pack Leader? Man, I am so bad with names. It was a 1/1 green creature, and every time you played something with greater power than it would increase by 1, get a 1/1 counter, and you could just get it bigger and bigger. It was really strong in standard, and green was able to be a very good deck because of that card. So I think this is another kind of signpost that green could maybe come back in the meta. But we're looking at Gruul this time, and yeah, just hold on, you'll see. It's so cool. So anyway, that one's going to get bigger and get more oil counters as we play creatures. And then we also have Exuberant Fuseling. And let's go ahead and zoom in here. Makes it easier to see for you guys. So this is a 0/1 with Trample and gets +1 for each oil counter on it. When it enters the battlefield or whenever another creature or artifact you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, put an oil counter on Exuberant Fuseling. So starts out as a 1/1 trample because it has 1 oil counter on it, and then anytime a creature dies, it's going to grow bigger and bigger in power and get more oil counters on it. All right, so yeah, these cards get bigger with more oil, and they want to get more oil counters. Then we also have Armored Scrap Gorger, which is a 2-mana 0/3. So remember that it has greater toughness than this guy, so it's actually going to still give it another counter on it. And it's a mana dork that whenever it taps, you exile a card from a graveyard and you put an oil counter on the Scrap Gorger. And as long as it has 3 or more counters, then it becomes a 3/3. All right, so yeah, basically it gets oil counters when you tap it for mana, and eventually it will become a 2-mana 3/3, which is still pretty good. So yeah, remember that. And then our 3-drops are the Ichor Plate Golem. So this is a 3-mana 2/3. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it has 1 or more oil counters on it, put an oil counter on it. Creatures you control with oil counters get +1/+1. So Evolving Adaptive comes in with an oil counter. So it's going to get 2 oil counters if it comes in after the golem. Exuberant Fuseling, same thing. It's going to have 2 oil counters. This one does not, but it will get the +1/+1 as long as it has an oil counter on it. And then we also have another creature, Migloss, Maze Crusher. This is a 3-mana 4/4, and it comes in with 5 oil counters on it. So it's also going to get a +1/+1 from the golem. And it has a bunch of abilities, which is a little bit hard to see, but you can remove 1 oil counter and pay 1 mana. It gets Vigilance and Menace, so you can swing it for damage a lot easier. Remove 2 oil counters and pay 2 mana, then it gets +2/+2. And if you remove 3, you can destroy an artifact or enchantment. So pretty flexible and nice. But for us, the main thing we care about is that it comes in with 5 oil counters. All right, and then the last creature we got is Cinder/Ravager, which is 6 mana for a 5/5, but it costs 1 less for each permanent you control with an oil counter on it. It has Vigilance, and when it enters the battlefield, deal 1 damage to each creature your opponent controls. So this is pretty good payoff for us having all our creatures with oil counters on them. And if you can at least have 2 permanents with oil counters, then this will be a 4 mana 5/5 with Vigilance that deals 1 damage to each creature your opponent controls, which maybe not that relevant. Mostly will be good against the aggro decks, so maybe against soldiers or mono red or something. You might kill 1 or 2 creatures with that. Not guaranteed, but that's not that crucial. The main thing is you're getting a cheap large body with Vigilance. Okay, so it doesn't stop there. That's just part of it. So that's the creature package. That's one of your win cons, is swinging in with these oil counters with damage. All your creatures are getting bigger and bigger. The more oil you got, the more creatures you play. And then, so our instance, Volt Charge, 3 mana, deal 3 damage to any target and proliferate. So that says any target, including the opponent's face. And then proliferate, well, every single one of our creatures basically comes in with an oil counter. So we can proliferate them to increase their power and increase their damage. Make this a 3/3. And, well, this one just gets more oil counters on it. So, but anyway, so that's really good. On top of that, so we deal damage to the face. These guys are damaging face. So we're doing aggro and we're burning them out a little bit. We also have this one, Free from Flesh, sorry. 1 mana, red. Target creature gets +2/+2, and put 2 oil counters on it. So normally I wouldn't play this type of combat trick. However, in this deck it really works out well because we want the oil counters a lot. And essentially, as long as you're not playing against control and you're going to get blown out with it, or the opponent doesn't have like all their mana untapped and you're gonna get blown out with it. So you got to play carefully. But if you play around the opponent's removal with this, then essentially you can turn your like Exuberant Fuseling from a 1/1 into a 5/3 with 1 spell. You can turn your Evolving Adaptive from a 1/1 into a 5/5. You can turn on your Armored Scrap Gorger because you add 2 oil counters to it and give it +2/+2. So, you know, if it has 1 oil counter at least, then it will become yeah, 5/5. So all of these turn into 5/5s basically with this spell. So pretty good, especially good for getting in the damage. Especially on this one you have Trample, so you're almost always going to get the damage through. On top of that, you can use it on your Golem or your Cinder/Ravager to give them oil counters when normally they wouldn't have it. Which means that the +1/+1 also increases their power. So this one will +1/+1 itself because it has an oil counter on it. And this one would get the +1/+1 benefit as well. So that's all really cool and stuff like that. But that's not the coolest part. So we continue. So the coolest part is this Filigree Silex. So I didn't really think about it before, but it's an artifact. It's 2 mana, and the benefit of artifacts is they can tap immediately the turn they enter the battlefield, right? So basically this is our win con. This is a 10 damage burn to the opponent's face. So we get in a bunch of damage with our little dorks, you know, they're not even little, they're going to be growing bigger and bigger. We're getting a bunch of damage. Or maybe the board stalls. Boards might even stall after you got in some damage. But you're able to keep like growing these with Proliferate and with your Free from Flesh and stuff like that. And then you put the Silex down, you activate it, remove 10 counters from, you know, some of your creatures, especially Miglos. Like this doesn't matter, but it has 5 oil counters on it. So that's half of what you need for the Silex already. And you deal 10 damage to the opponent's face. So yeah, basically you just gotta you either have to get enough synergy to get 20 oil counters on your creatures, which is probably going to take a little while. Or you deal 10 damage to their face, and then you get to finish it off with the Silex, which is not that unreasonable, especially because you have a little bit of burn here, and you have a bunch of 1-drops, which are going to be getting pretty big pretty quickly. So that's really sweet. And worst case scenario, you put this down, and you can just tap it and put oil counters on it itself. You can also use this as a removal for opponent's creature if there's something that's really annoying that you have to get rid of. Those are all things you can do with it. And the other benefit is when you sacrifice this Silex, your Exuberant Fuseling will also get an oil counter, because it says when an artifact goes to the graveyard, you get an oil counter. So even if you use this early on as like a removal for the opponent's creature, you're still going to be pumping your team somewhat. So lots of cool synergies there. The Silex also works again to make this spell cheaper, this Cinder/Ravager. And we even have the Monumental Facade, which is a land that has oil counters. So that can be used by the Silex. The land also makes your Cinder/Ravager cheaper. The land also lets you put oil counters on your creatures or artifacts. So you can put oil counters on the Inkerplate Golem, the Cinder/, any of these other guys to make them bigger and grow bigger. So there's potential that you could drop a couple of these little 1-mana dorks, use your land to just give them oil counters each turn and make them to like 3/3s or 4/4s, and drop your Inkerplate Golem. Now you've got like these giant 5/5s on turn 3, and what's your opponent going to do about that, right? So yeah, it seems pretty great, and you could even potentially, like, because of how quickly you can add oil to these little 1-mana creatures, you could burn out the opponent as early as like turn 4, possibly, which seems crazy, right? So I think it seems pretty hype. There might be some things you have to play around with, change out some of the numbers, and there's a few other like proliferate type spells and creatures in the set that might be good to include as well. But at least for the initial test of this, the concept, this is what I'm going with, and these are the cards that I felt like fit together the best, had the most synergy, and seemed to work well. And yeah, we'll just have to play it and see how it pans out in the end, but seems pretty cool to me. And we haven't had Gruul be viable for a long time, and I'm just curious how the oil 10 damage to the face burn spell is going to work out, but be cool if it does happen. It might be pretty upsetting to be on the receiving end of that, but it will be fun to burn out the opponents. All right, well, that's it for the main deck. I guess the only thing I didn't mention was the lands. All of the creatures are all Phyrexian, so we can make use of Secluded Courtyard, we can make use of the Seed Core, both of which give you any color mana for Phyrexian creatures. So that's another big benefit to having this package of creatures here, is that you can always be sure that you have the mana for them, even though you're running the Monumental Facade. Yeah, I think that's it. So Gruul Oil Burn as the number 2 new brew for MTG1. Let me know what you think. Is it not good enough, you think, or are you hyped for it? I want to know what you think in the comments. And we'll have the number 1 deck coming up soon in the next couple days, and then I think I'm gonna maybe do a dump of all. I have so many Dimir decks that I made because I just love Dimir. Like a Dimir self-mill and a Dimir Jace version of Dimir, and like a Dimir creatures, and like I have so many. So I'll probably do like one day where I just go through all the random Dimir decks I made. And if you guys want it, I can do a historic one as well. So let me know in the comments if you're interested in historic decks, new brews for historic, and I'll try to work on that as well. All right. Yeah, hope you can still have fun out there on the ladder before the new set comes out. But if not, only got about a week left. Not even a week, I guess. A little less than a week. So yeah, go out there, have fun, and see ya.